All right, 10th grade. Today we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is economic and political theory, specifically socialism, communism, and capitalism. Are big ideologies, political ideologies, economic beliefs that truly transform the 1800s and especially affect the 1900s, and is something we still debate about today. So really excited to talk about it. We are, of course, in period 5 still. And let's get to it. First, what is capitalism? Capitalism, I'm going to make sure I get this definition perfect like I typed it. Capitalism is both an economic and cultural system based on innovation and investment to increase wealth. Cool. That's it. It's very, very basic.
Your lecture is boring me.
You really need to do that.
I'm kidding.
That's why you never shoot with Alyssa in the room. Rule number 1. Capitalism as a system has existed for the entirety of human history, but was created as a theory thanks to a man named Adam Smith in 1776, when he wrote a book known as The Wealth of Nations. Adam Smith had this idea called consumer capitalism. At its basic, the idea of consumer capitalism is that we as humans are greedy and will do what's in our best interest. This best interest, though, is actually really good for society. We are always going to be making more and more and more things to create more wealth for ourselves. These extra things are known as a surplus. And this surplus of goods is what we can use to help the sick, the poor, the elderly. But the basic idea is that as humans, we produce more and more and more to create wealth. This only helps people as we create more. Part of this belief as well is the idea of the free market. We've talked about this before, but the free market is heavily tied to the idea of capitalism. At its basic, it means that government should not have any rules about trade, business, things like that. This is because people in businesses will make the best decisions when it comes to goods and prices. People will only buy goods that they deem at a good price. That means businesses have to sell goods at that price, or else people won't buy them. As long as the government stays out of this free market, goods will be produced that are needed, and they'll be sold at the correct prices for what people is willing to pay for them. This is also known as laissez-faire economics, or is the idea that the more government stays out of the economy, the better the economy will do. Even if the economy goes through lows, such as a depression or recession, it is better for the government to do nothing, as that is just a natural correction that will be fixed by people's actions and businesses' actions. Now, by the time of industrialization, that whole part is called consumer capitalism. Basically meaning that we as people want to consume items. That means people will reduce items that people want to consume. You're only going to see things made that people actually want, and thus that's why we have this economy. We're all producing things that people want. Another version of capitalism that happens during this time is industrial capitalism, as industrialization is really when capitalism becomes this main idea that people talk about and follow in government policy. Industrial capitalism is the idea that the way to make money is to put forward upfront a huge investment in factories, machines, transportation, things like that. Things that are vital for industrialization, the production of goods. This huge upfront cost will pay off over time as factories produce a lot of goods that you then sell and make a profit off of. This sort of capitalism is still pretty evident today. A huge part of our economy is banks or venture capitalists or other groups investing large sums of money into businesses or ideas that will then pay off over time. You're going to go ahead and pause here, answer the first question about what is capitalism. Hypothetically, if you answer that first question, we're going to part 2, the effects of capitalism. Capitalism has plenty of positives that you could argue, such as 1, capitalism produces a lot of goods. Not just when I say goods though, that doesn't really explain the entire effect. I mean, 1, goods become a lot cheaper because we can produce more of them and faster. 2, goods become a more consistent quality as machines are going to make the same level of goods every time. Not only that, there's a lot more variety of goods. Since we can make goods cheaper and faster, it allows for more variety and differences. That's why you can go to the grocery store and see all the different types of goods. Not only that, it can be argued that capitalism has helped a lot of people. People have made money off this system, creating goods, creating businesses that then make them money, and thus increases trade and brings even more money. And it can be argued that capitalism has helped a lot of people gain wealth and pull themselves out of worse situations. Not only that, capitalism has also created the goods and the technology that we use as comforts today. Many people argue that the cars, the way we live in apartments, air conditioning, plenty of things. I'm kind of just listed a bunch of technologies, but the idea is that we would not have innovated as much as we did if not for the push in capitalism to always be making the next best item to make more money. That's the idea. I'm always innovating and creating new pieces of technology that will make me money under this capitalist system. Now, on the other side of that, though, is the issues of what happens when you really push self-interest to its maximum. If you think about the core idea of capitalism, I, as a person, am always trying to increase my wealth. There is really no such thing as too much wealth. I am always trying to create the next good or the next item that will make me money. At the same time, though, it also means I'm willing to do whatever tactic or policy I need to also increase my wealth. This has a lot of implication when it comes to business. For example, in a business, if I own a factory, it is in my best interest to keep costs as low as possible. This means I would have low wages, poor working conditions. I would fire anyone who wasn't working as high of caliber as possible, even if that means firing that person would potentially make them destitute. The whole point being is that it matters for my self-interest to make as much money as possible. This might mean as a business, it's also in my self-interest to get rid of all my competition, so I'm the only one selling something, I have a monopoly, and then raising the price by a huge amount. The point I'm trying to get at is that while capitalism encourages new inventions, new ways of living, new improvements, it also encourages some pretty bad stuff in humans, as we're always trying to make the most money. This also causes huge inequality. Remember earlier I said this idea that surpluses would be used to help people. Well, what if people don't want to give up those surpluses? The idea of the inequality is that we see people in industrial society. Remember that upper middle class, the factory owners. They make a huge amount of money. Some of the richest people that have ever existed were the people who are at the forefront of the industrialization, owning the first factories, the first railroad lines, things like that. They made more money than they could ever possibly spend, and their relatives, their descendants today, still live off of. That inequality, thus, in the 1800s was pushed to its extreme, as you had a few people who owned most of the wealth, and then a vast majority of people who had very, very little wealth. And that was encouraged under capitalism. Why? If you can make the most money possible, you don't have to give it up. In fact, it's in your self-interest to make sure you keep onto that wealth. Cool. We're going to pause here, and you're going to... Actually, no, you're not. This thus had a domino effect. If I, as a business owner, kept wages really, really low, that means my workers couldn't afford very much. The only thing they can afford, really, really bad housing. That means the housing that was built was really low level, low tier. The tenement housing we talked about, as that's the only thing workers can afford. And it domino effects from there. So I, as an owner, am now creating even worse conditions for my factory workers because it's in my self-interest to do so. And society will adjust to that because it's in society's self-interest to try to make money off people whenever possible. Cool, you're going to pause here and answer question 2 about the effects of capitalism. All right, our third section is titled Communism, Socialism, and a Response to Capitalism. So that's our first idea here. Our new systems, our new ideologies of communism and socialism are a direct response to capitalism and its perceived failures. Before we get into that, let's first define both communism and socialism. Communism is the political ideology and the belief that the lower class should unite together and overthrow the rich, violently if needed, to create an equal society. Socialism is both a political and economic ideology. It's also a way to set up society. Socialism is the belief that society should be set up in a way that redistributes income, wealth, and property to people equally. Another way to think about it is that the means of production, the way things are created, should be shared amongst people. Now with that, another way to think about it, socialism is supposed to be the end result of communism. This overthrow leads to this more equal redistribution-based society. Cool, so where does that come from and its effects? First, we're going to start with Karl Marx. Karl Marx grew up in the early 1800s, and he grew up seeing the negative sides of capitalism, the ghettos, the poverty, the extreme inequality, what people were forced to do to try to survive in a capitalist system where you have to create your own wealth to survive. Karl Marx looked at that and said, this isn't right. Karl Marx viewed history as one of class struggle, or the idea that the lower class is always battling the upper class. And this has been constant throughout history, as the upper class tries to keep power and the lower class tries to get some power back. He gave the example of feudalism, with the lords and the king having all the land, and the serfs forced to work with the lords for survival. This has been something consistent throughout history. Capitalism as a system encourages this split, as it encourages people in power to keep their power and to try to make as much money as possible off those that they control. Under industrialization, Karl Marx said that this has gotten even worse, as those who own machines, the means of production, known as the bourgeoisie, I'll put that spelling on the screen, the bourgeoisie who own the factories, own the transportation, own how things are made, make all of the money, while the proletariat, or those who work, get nothing. Even the proletariat are the ones creating that wealth through their labor. Karl Marx argued that this was a system that could not continue, and at some point, communism had to happen. In his eyes, the lower class had to unite as proletariat against the bourgeoisie. His argument, though, was that how industrialization actually allows this to happen. To Karl Marx, this communism, this overthrow of the rich, could not happen without industrialization. Industrialization put a lot of lower class people into cities, into large communities where they could easily communicate. Industrialization reduced travel times. Industrialization also increased how easy communication was. The basic idea being is that it allowed the lower class to truly unite as a large group. So in Karl Marx's opinion, industrialization would finally allow the lower class to drop the things that divide them: race, religion, anything that might be used to divide the lower class, and instead unite them against their one true enemy, the rich who abuse them and use their labor as a means to enrich themselves and not help the lower class. He then encourages the lower class to rise up and overthrow the rich, violently if needed to. And the end result should be this equal society, socialism. Socialism as an idea is how society should be set up once this actually happens. People who are socialists today often advocate for this society to be created in a peaceful way, through democracy, through voting and lawmaking. But basically, what do socialists want for a society? The main idea is that the means of production should be shared in a community so its benefits help all. The idea being is that if I work for something, I should get its equal share of the wealth I produce. A practical example today would be a business that is run by the employees, not by one person. That everyone has a choice in how the business runs and makes wealth and makes equal amount of wealth for their labor off of it. Some other things that are requested by socialists include an elimination of private property, land basically, that everyone then shares, rent or mortgage payments that are used to help society instead of enriching a few landowners, free education for all, democracy or a shared vote for everybody, huge taxes on the rich as a way to redistribute wealth to the poor through government social systems, welfare programs that help the poor in times of need. The government runs transportation communication as a way to make sure everyone has the ability to use these technologies. The goal, at its simplest, is to make a society that is truly equal. That if I take part in labor, I get the full rewards of that labor. It doesn't go majority to someone who owns that business. And to create a society that truly helps people with what they need and allows them to find fulfillment through their work. Now, the effects of socialism in the 1800s is not very much. Socialism as an ideology, and communism as well, spreads throughout the 1800s, but it is an ideology that is obviously against those in power, and is often something that the upper class fears becoming a reality. Oftentimes in many European countries, to be part of the Socialist or Communist Party is illegal, and you could be arrested for it. And so socialism and communism will not have very large effects in the 1800s. At most, what socialism and communism does is rally the lower class together, try to build that class consciousness, Socialists are very active in unions and are very active in trying to get the lower class to fight for their improvements. Many of the improvements we talked about the other day, such as voting rights, better working conditions, less hours, better pay, were often advocated and fought for by socialists. All right, cool. With that, you're going to answer question 3, and that is the end of our lecture.